Good morning, Muzammil. A warm welcome to you on behalf of APAC News Network. We are a media organization headquartered out of Noida with offices across India and outside India also. So, primarily, we focus on government, healthcare, education, enterprise IT, and BFSI. So primarily the discussion today, what we would like to start is understanding one, the solutions and services that are there in the Acies portfolio, and two, to understand the use cases of no coding, especially with related to BFSI, and what are the solutions that you offer? How are the use cases of those solutions?
Sure. Thanks, Rajneesh. Thanks for having this interaction. I think just very quickly talking about ACS, and then I'll get straight to your question on no code and its use cases. So very quickly, ACS has four verticals: TechWorks, which is our technology business; consulting, which is our more traditional, conventional consulting business; Lighthouse, which is our learning and development business; and Ventures, which is our investment arm. Just focusing more specifically on TechWorks because that's where a lot of this no-code piece sits. There are sort of two broad things that TechWorks does. One is this no-code platform, and the second is risk and regulatory technology. A lot of our risk and regulatory technology is built on the no-code platform. So it's kind of we are building on the technology itself that we are sort of propagating, as will be the future, right? Now, just very quickly into what is no code. Fundamentally, the objective of no code is very simple. Today, when you have to build software, someone who understands functionality, someone who has the domain knowledge, has to translate that domain knowledge to somebody who knows coding. More often than not, these are not the same people. And because they are not the same people, the person who does the coding may not completely understand what the person with the domain is expecting. Once that process is complete through today, what is your traditional sort of business requirement documentation, business analysis, and the likes, that then sort of starts getting translated into what the machine or the computer can understand. So fundamentally, what's happening is the person who understands how to communicate with the computer to code through code or how to communicate with the machine through code translates those business requirements into something that a machine can understand. Now, the whole objective of no code is to remove this hop. It is to allow people with the domain knowledge, people who understand what they want their software to finally do, to directly interact with the machine. And what this essentially means is that through a bunch of essentially visual interfaces, a person who has the domain knowledge will then have the ability to directly explain to a machine what they want, and that essentially gets converted to software pretty much on the fly. So that's very fundamentally the concept of no code, what it's intended to achieve, and sort of how it does it, right? So of course, ACS has its no code platform, which is Revolutio, which is a pre-architected end-to-end truly no-code platform. Now, coming to your more specific question on the banking and financial services use cases. Now, it's important to understand that banking and financial services has invested in technology for a very long time. More importantly, a lot of that investment that has happened in technology has been in legacy technology over the years, which has to be maintained even today. So a lot of the core banking systems, core transaction processing systems, those have been there in process for a while. Now, therefore, for no code to become practically applicable to this industry, the first thing, and I think the most important thing, is to give it a space where it's not necessarily infringing on or replacing legacy technology. And a lot of that is around the customer and employee engagement side, which is kind of, I would say, the workflow or the interface layer between what happens at the back end of a bank or a financial services processes and what its employees do from a productivity standpoint, as well as what is expected from an employee or from a customer interface standpoint. So I think that's really where you'd expect no code technology to have the greatest imprint. So whether it is on customer onboarding, whether it is on the wealth management side, for your portfolio management, portfolio allocation portions of the decision, whether it's on the internal process or the operation side, a lot of pieces that have not been traditionally automated by either the core banking or core transaction processing systems. And I think that's the most prominent use case today. Going forward, of course, you'd expect that as technology replacement cycles come, especially in the risk and regulatory technology, a lot of the core sort of spaces today where fintechs operate on the transaction processing side as well, no code will sort of start taking precedence or prominence in sort of new budgetary or investment decisions in technology going forward.
Okay, thank you. I have two clarifications from the point you one mentioned. One, especially this risk and regulatory environment you talked about. This environment typically involves a lot of compliances across geographies and a lot of those conformances with those regulations and compliances. So, how do you ensure? And these compliances are often dynamic in nature because regulations just happen. And so, how do you ensure that dynamic and fast change? That is one part of it. The other part is earlier you mentioned about the workflow of certain processes. It can be the customer onboarding or a wealth management. Now, if we look back at last 1.5 years during the pandemic and how it has been more a work from home kind of environment, a lot of these workflow patterns itself have changed. How has this local platform sort of impacted by those changes, and how has it responded?
Yes, I think Rajesh, you make a very good point about the dynamism of regulatory environment. Regulators have, of course, become more are quicker to respond to environmental change. They do look to make corrections very quickly, but more importantly, they look to collect data very quickly into the process so that they can sort of reduce the systemic risk. Now, what this means is that there is more dynamic asks from regulators, whether it's on the regulatory reporting, the ability to monitor, manage, whether it is just the ability to provide information to a number of stakeholders, much quicker than people are used to. Now, what happens with traditional technology is that you've got to go through a whole change management process, which can last weeks, which can last months. Regulators, of course, do not and should not have the patience to wait for so long to get the information that they are seeking, because this information is directly or is specifically important to reducing systemic risk. And to that extent, what no code essentially does is it allows for development cycles for a lot of this to be shortened to days. You could, for example, if a regulator asked for something in the morning, you could by evening, codify that and provide it to a regulator, not just provide it using spreadsheets or putting together data. That's one part. There's a lot more that regulators are expecting in terms of simulation scenarios. What if they change this variable? What would happen? What if they change that variable? What would happen? And a lot of these things in traditional technology, while possible, take weeks to get to. And this can happen within hours or days, depending on the complexity of the use case. So that's really one sort of very critical advantage, both for the regulator and the regulated entity, insofar as no code is concerned. I think the answer to your second question, which is more around how this whole workflow piece has changed, the workflow piece has changed. It will become even more dynamic because we moved essentially from a work from office to a work from home, work from anywhere environment. We're starting to see as things sort of become a little more normalized that hybrid environments need to kick in, which means people will come back to office, but not in the same mode, not in the same fashion. not in exactly the same workflow format that it was before the pandemic or during the pandemic. And again, no code's very important because what it essentially does is it allows workflows to be modified very quickly. Needless to say, once time is saved, cost is saved. um, you'd expect, for example, a workflow application to be able to go live within 15 days, which traditionally would have taken about 3 months to achieve. And that dynamism now in workflows will become even more, because as organizations start realizing that they've adapted to the pandemic, as they've started realizing that they can move the IT speed much further up, they're going to want to push the envelope. They're going to want to do things within hours, within days, that traditionally was acceptable to do, within months. And that's again where no code really kicks in. It comes into its own, because it allows you to deliver things a lot quicker. So I think on both counts, right, whether it's just responsiveness to regulation, and responsiveness to external environment to change workflows very quickly, no code, apart from of course being far more cost effective, it's extremely quick to deploy, and I think that's what's going to make a lot of difference.
Okay. One part I'd like to understand, see, since we talked about the pre-pandemic already, there was a certain scenario, and many of these organizations had to migrate towards to support this work from anywhere kind of platform. So, what role did local play there during this migration, and what were the most challenging impact of this migration?
Right. So I think two, three things happened, while the pandemic sort of played out, right? So what essentially happened is that people scrambled to put in place infrastructure which wasn't there. So when I say infrastructure, it's everything from a VDI, the ability to work remotely, the information security that's required in relation to data when it's accessed over external networks, all of those things, right? So that's one piece that people focused a lot on, just to get things or to keep things moving during the pandemic. And at that point of time, the focus was not so much on productivity. The focus was not so much on, changing anything. A lot of that focus was on just making sure that how we did it earlier will continue to happen on an ongoing basis. Now, a few months into the pandemic, what people started realizing is that productivity will inevitably fall. Because, say, for example, you were used to doing something in office, you got to do that remotely. There are, five ways in which that process can break. Everything from internet availability, to the fact that your VDI is down, to the fact that you simply can't access certain data outside a certain network. So people started realizing very quickly that while you can very quickly replicate a office environment into a virtual environment, there is a certain degree of productivity loss that automatically accompanies it. So I'd say roughly about 5 to 6 months into the pandemic, what people started realizing is that the focus now has to shift from just the ability to virtualize what you had in a physical space, to very quickly moving to the productivity side. And that's kind of where no code, low code again started getting adopted very quickly. Low code, of course, is sort of accelerates the development process. No code virtually eliminates coding through that development process. So of course, there is that difference, but both had a part to play. No code more specifically allowed for significant workflow changes to happen. For everything, for simple tools around employee time management, the ability to sort of interface with customers, respond to requests which otherwise were physically happening. All of those sort of efficiency or productivity processes started becoming sort of more frontline with the no code side. What also started happening, more importantly, is that when you start touching on the productivity aspect, it's not just the It's just not the frontline productivity of how you interface or interact. You start realizing that fundamental productivity in the ops or the back end, which earlier was ignored, it's also an opportunity to fix that. And that's sort of where no code again became very very relevant, because if you're fixing just the interface point of the process, you might as well fix everything that runs into the process. So I'd say in the first phase of the pandemic, which is about 3 to 6 months in, there was very little role to play in productivity improvement. A lot of it was around just virtualizing what you had. But the next 6 months afterwards, as people started settling into the new normal, and it was not just responsive, a lot of focus moved to productivity, and with that productivity, a lot of focus moved to no code as well.
Thank you. Another focus area you touched upon is the security concern. And again, during these times, this work from anywhere, we have seen more heterogeneous networks coming into the system. So, how low code can ensure the security, especially in these dynamic times?
Yeah, so I think low code by itself is no more or no less secure than sort of traditional software development. No code, on the other hand, is definitely a lot more secure from a very simple perspective. You're not actually introducing no code or new code into a no code software every time you build an application, right? So think about it this way. Today you're building a customer onboarding application. Tomorrow you want to do KYC on it. Day after tomorrow you feel like doing some AML checks on it. You move further from there and you say, I'm going to do a lot more of the early warning or responsive monitoring as well on the system. Now, every time you traditionally went and built each one of these applications, you were writing new lines of code. And every time you write new lines of code, you will inevitably introduce vulnerability. It's just the way it works, right? There is more chance for error, there is more chance for issues like cross scripting, and a lot of that goes away with no code because you are virtually not touching the code. The core code, once it has been tested, once it has been proven to be secure, every new application that's built on the platform, even though symbolically you may still want to go through the security test that you need to do, you are unlikely to find anything new, simply because you haven't introduced any new line of code into the software. So I think, Rajneesh, at this point, it's important from a security perspective to make that distinction between low code and no code. While low code accelerates your development process by having pre prepared frameworks, scripts, libraries, you still are stitching all of it together. And therefore, you are introducing as much or as little new code into it as you would in a traditional software development. No code, on the other hand, you are virtually not putting in a single new line of code. And when you do that, you are not giving a chance for new vulnerabilities to kick in. And in that sense of the word, no code is a lot more secure. That having been said, when you do implement a no code platform, you must follow the same rigors of vulnerability penetration testing, your information security, just your environmental measures that you need to make sure that it is as secure as any other traditional software. But incremental application builds don't need that kind of effort.
Thanks. One instance you mentioned about the no code, that there are libraries and these templates of, and you also mentioned about AI ML techniques being implemented. Now, a lot of cases in financial services, what is critical, the way analytics is used, is so that very meaningful insights can be derived, and which further helps in growing the business. So, in this typical environment of low code where these libraries and templates are there, how would you ensure for competitive business gain, the BFSI player can derive meaningful insights by using analytics?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's sort of been a bit of a misnomer in the analytics space is that visualization has been positioned as business intelligence, right? Visualization is pretty much the last leg. It's just the dashboards, the reports. It's just the distribution of information. There is a whole bunch of data management and compute that underlies it or should underlie it correctly before you get that business intelligence done. Now, what happens with sort of a low code scenario is that some of these are templated, but they are not pre-architected, right? With a no code scenario, these are pre-architected. What that essentially means is that in a no code environment today, if you wanted to simply plug and play your entire data analytics framework, everything from the data warehouse to the ability to stream data to the ability to run compute scripts, your ETL portions, all of that, including in-memory storages, temporary storages before it's finally rendered at the dashboard layer or the visualization layer. No code today is a pretty much plug and play game. You just take the framework, plug and play. You can do your data management, you can write your scripts, or you can use sort of pre-existing scripts, string them together, and there you have it. You have your entire analytics business intelligence on demand. What happens with low code is that you have pieces of this that are templatized, so it's obviously a lot better than sort of building it. But low code isn't pre-architected, so now it's up to you to take those pieces, put it together. If you did put it together in the correct way, it would be as effective. If you didn't, you have that challenge. The other problem, scalability. Most business intelligence efforts today are built for purpose. They're built for a use case. So when you go to the next use case, you have to re-architect large portions of it, or you just have to build a parallel pipeline for it. And again, no code sort of solves this problem because it is completely pre-architected. So I think to that extent, actually for business intelligence, no code is a serious boon. It will slash down costs of just building massive data warehouses, going through a multitude of data technologies before finally you string together a reasonable answer. And I think that does change the game very, very dramatically. Low code, on the other hand, also improves the game. It doesn't entirely completely change the game, but it's definitely a step up from the traditional sort of build everything from the DW to streaming technologies to ETL pipelines till it's finally rendered at a dashboard level.
Great. Now let's come to the more the business side of it from an Aces perspective, TechWorks perspective. First, we talk about. Do you work in other domains other than BFSI also? And overall, what is the go-to-market strategy that TechWorks follows?
Sure. So we do have a significant financial services footprint. Even today, I would say about 75% of our revenues come from financial services. The remaining 25 come from, I'd say, large corporates, typically in the energy, metal mining space. I think what we've realized and are working very hard towards is to sort of democratize the technology we have to sectors beyond financial services. Traditionally, we focused on financial services because that's where our core competencies have been. But we are now more actively working towards, spaces outside of financial services. So we sort of split our strategy into two parts. In the financial services space, we are working a lot harder with clients on the adoption side, moving from legacy technologies to no code, helping them build actual use cases so that they see the value and then they can sort of run on their own. So that's been our strategy more on the financial services side. On the non-financial services side, we are seeking a lot more partnerships. In fact, within the financial services side as well, in domains where we do not have the expertise, which is quite a few again, we are looking at partnerships over there. And the idea there is to enable and empower partners to be able to understand, learn the platform, and then build on it. Both build their own IP on it, because at the end of the day, you want people to be able to remonetize what they build. It's not just a one-time sort of a consulting thing. And that's the part we're working really hard on. We've of course signed one of the JVs last week. We are looking at sort of more partnerships like that, which are both sort of license-based partnerships as well as equity sharing partnerships. where we can empower more and more people to use their expertise, use their domain, to go and build applications that they can monetize, that can create sort of a sustainable license stream of revenue for them, in addition to services. Um, we do realize across the spectrum there is still a lot of education that's required for people to understand no code, to be able to distinguish true no code, from everything else that looks like or sort of feels like low code or no code. And that's the other part we're working much harder on, is to sort of start working on the education side. Sometimes it sounds almost euphoric, because you're sort of essentially saying that 30 years of the way we built software is suddenly going to change so dramatically. So in certain cases, it does sound sort of very utopian. But sort of converting that sort of disbelief that people have at first sight to actual use cases, more through education and sort of doing a few, showing it to people, and then helping them adopt it more broadly. I think that's where a large part of our go to market effort is. But cornerstone growth wise, we do believe that pretty much all of this is going to happen through a larger network of partners, because no code is essentially, it's about the domain knowledge. It's about underlying expertise that people have built over the years, and being able to translate that expertise into technology very rapidly. And therefore, for us, the go to market will almost always be through people who have the domain knowledge. And I think that's where a large part of our focus will remain.
So, specifically for the non-BFSI segment, you mentioned about mining and energy, and whatever other sectors. Right now, as you mentioned, 25% of the business. To grow that part of the business through partnerships, as you mentioned, what are the specific, if you can mention any specific initiatives which are
Sure.
planned to reach out to more verticals also?
Sure. So I think there's two, three things we're doing. We've sort of started partner training, sort of enabling people to understand the concept and start building on it. I think that's the first step. Investing into the partner knowledge. The second step is our ability to invest directly into ventures that we do with them, because many a times, while people do have the domain knowledge, they may not have either the capital, or even just the initial entrepreneurial help that you need. Everything from how do I set up my business, how do I run operations, how do I deal with compliances, how do I market a lot of my stuff. So that's the second part. We are investing and sort of working closely with people on, to help them build that business out of it, not just do the training for them, but also help them or handhold them through the business part of it. So we do that partially through the Ventures Revolution program, for people who sort of have more mature tech businesses, who've been in the business but not in no code, and are making that transition. A lot of that is the hand holding part. What we will be doing over the next quarter is providing direct access to the software to a larger set of people. Today, the access is sort of through a partnership program. But what we will be doing is we will sort of start offering access more widely, especially at the educational level as well. Whether it's with colleges, people who can get into the groove, learn early in the process. So that's the other thing we're looking to do. A lot of enablement pieces on. Um, so I think those are the important parts. We will, in the next 6 months, launch a marketplace as well, which what it will do is that people who build applications on the no code platform will then be able to directly sell or market that through the marketplace. because at the end of the day, one of the most difficult things in the tech or the software business is the cost of sales, is the cost of reaching the customer, is the cost of acquiring the customer. And that's the other part we're going to enable over the next 6 months, where people, as they build applications, they can sort of put it on the Revolutio marketplace itself, and it will allow people to sort of directly engage with and buy the end product. So these are the things we have either already done or are looking to do over the next 3 to 6 months to sort of make this more mainstream.
Okay. And towards the end, one thing I'd like to ask is beyond TechWorks, you mentioned about the learning and development and the consulting business also. So, a little bit elaboration on what exactly you do in those two businesses, and are there any synergies with TechWorks also?
Sure. So the way it works today is that consulting, of course, is sort of more traditional advisory, but more importantly, it also implements the TechWorks solutions. So as you put new products in the market, and until you have a wider range of partners who are in a position to implement it, the consulting business implements TechWorks products. It's kind of your first proof of concept, the first people who sort of do it, and sort of set the benchmark on what happens. So consulting is definitely very synergistic to the TechWorks business. Today, I'd say about half of the consulting business's revenues are on the back of TechWorks sort of license or subscription sales. And we expect that to sort of hold steady, because we will also use the consulting business to enable a lot of the partners who build on the no code platform. Lighthouse, which is our learning and development vertical, has sort of two objectives. One is very clearly to sort of educate people on adoption of the TechWorks technology. But I think the second part also has a lot more to do with the financial literacy part of things. A lot of things in the financial services space, everything from concepts to application, tend to be both complicated, jargonized, especially with the sort of heavy proliferation of statistical models into pretty much everything. And one of the things that Lighthouse does is sort of start demystifying that. We've been doing a lot of work with the financial services industry itself with Lighthouse, on the education, on new technologies, on migrating into things like AI, ML, how to do it, how to deliver those use cases. We will start getting a lot more grassroots again with Lighthouse, go beyond the more obvious financial services industry, and sort of go more early stage into the financial literacy and application of technology to achieve that financial literacy. So that's essentially what those businesses are for.
So, the lighthouse, were you mentioning more on the financial services, the domain expertise? You touched upon earlier upon this training towards the college. Now, more on the college level and the higher education level, it's the traditional coding methodologies that are being taught. So, in terms of, if I may say, evangelization there, or how do you institutionalize with higher education universities that low code or no code thing is taught in an academic curricula? So how will you ensure that?
Right. So, Rajesh, I think you make a very good point. I think, over the last 10 years, it has almost become a default that you must know coding. If you come out of the education system today, it doesn't matter what your core domain. If you don't know coding, you're going to start at the back of the queue, or you're definitely going to be disadvantaged compared to your peers. I think the first thing we're trying to establish is that, there are people who will still need to code. Someone's got to build those no code platforms as well. But coding in the traditional sense doesn't have to be a default skill that you have to build. It doesn't have to be a default choice that you want. You can still continue to specialize on the domain side, and you must understand enough of technology for you to be able to leverage no code platforms to convert that domain or the depth that you build into no code. So I think that's the anchor point here. I don't think that education on no code will replace necessarily the coding or the learning around coding that people do. But the first step is giving them the choice, and it doesn't have to be a pressure point anymore, saying if you don't know coding, you're really going to miss out on something. And I think that's the first start point. I think the second part that we're looking to do with a lot of that education is use case based, because understanding or learning no code technology, once you grasp the concept, it's pretty easy. 2-3 months into that learning cycle, you're pretty much on your own. You start discovering things you can do by yourself, so it's pretty exciting that way. But I think what's important is use cases, the ability to take real world business use cases back into those universities and colleges, teach them with no code and this domain, this specialization. This is what the output's going to look like. This is what you will really build. And all this without necessarily knowing coding. It's a choice. You could still learn coding, but even if you made that choice not to, this is what you can build. And therefore, that's what our focus will be after sort of the initial induction into no code, which I believe is the easier part. It is taking the real world use cases and real domain. And it's not just about taking no code to colleges or into higher education. It's also about taking what the industry really wants, and explaining it to them in a real world, or rather in their simulated environment, explaining to them what real world applications look like. And that's what our focus will be, and we definitely believe that that will sort of bridge the gap heavily between what higher education today produces and what the industry ultimately seeks or expects people to have in terms of domain knowledge.
So, other than my last question is, other than this training focus, and you talked about the marketplace also. Now, if we look at the next 2 to 3 quarters, other than these two, what are going to be the key focus initiatives from your part?
Yeah, so I think what's also important for us to do is, and as you'd imagine, over the last 2 to 3 years, we've been investing back heavily into building the platform. We're putting out new features every day. We're starting to templatize things even more, so that even within the concept of no code, you are going to be in a position to sort of drag and drop with lesser clicks, and improving that UI or UX for the end sort of user, reducing the number of clicks. If it takes days to build an application, it should take hours. That's what we're going for. That's the first step that we're focusing on. But what we're looking to do over the next 12 months is move the bar a lot higher, move from the visual interface to a natural language interface, which essentially means that today, when you're interacting visually with the machine, by sort of using symbols or using pre-created things that you must know of, and need some basic training to sort of get attuned to. We're trying to raise the bar and take that to natural language, which essentially means that you could speak, whether that's sort of typed out, and eventually, hopefully, that will go into sort of voice recognition. But you could speak to the machine, ask it what software needs to be built, and it will build based on natural language, not just even on a sort of a visual interaction basis. And that's really our goal finally. That's what we are seeking to do over the next 12 months. It is challenging because it's a number of technologies that need to come together. It's not. It's also very important to understand that natural language is not just about English as the primary language. We also recognize that you need to be able to work with a larger language set. Um, and those are the focuses for the next 12 months for us on the no code platform. One is to raise the bar from visual interface to natural language, and then also sort of expand the scope of natural language beyond English, to other languages in which people can interface with the technology.
Thanks a lot, and thanks again for taking out time today.
Thank you. Pleasure speaking to you.